He was the face of classic Hollywood masculinity. A titan on screen, a rebel behind the scenes, and a man whose real story remained buried for decades. Burt Lancaster, a name that evokes strength, charm, and an unmistakable magnetism. But as the cameras rolled and the accolades piled up, Lancaster was hiding something. That would have ended his career in an instant if the public ever found out. Behind that smile was a life of secrets. A tangle of forbidden loves. With men who were equally trapped by fame, fear, and a system designed to crush anyone who stepped out of line. And when Lancaster finally spoke only to a trusted few, it wasn't to shock. It was to finally breathe. This is the story Hollywood never wanted you to hear. Burt Lancaster was born in the fall of 1913 in the tough neighborhoods of East Harlem, New York City. The son of a postal worker and a housewife, his childhood was colored by street fights, church-going, and hard knocks. But even as a boy, there was something larger than life about him. He moved like a panther, graceful, instinctual, alive. And then the circus came to town. Not as entertainment, but as a calling. Lancaster ran away and became a trapeze artist. He learned to fly through the air without wires, to trust a partner's grip in midair, and to land with the confidence of a god. That physicality, the raw, real athleticism, would later shape his screen presence in a way few actors could replicate. He was the action hero, before the genre even had a name, but a freak injury forced him to abandon the trapeze. He returned to the grind of New York life, doing odd jobs, selling goods door to door, even dabbling in politics. Then, almost by accident, acting entered the picture. It started with a Broadway play, then a screen test. And then came The Killers in 1946. He played a doomed Xbox-era role drenched in fatalism, regret, and raw power. Lancaster wasn't just good, he was electric. He didn't act like others. He brooded. He moved. The screen didn't just capture him, it worshipped him. And yet, even as he rose to fame, Lancaster began constructing a carefully curated dual existence. He married June Ernst, a fellow acrobat whose mother was one of the earliest female aerialists in circus history. Their bond was more than romantic, it was a partnership of physicality and mutual understanding. They performed together. They trained together. But the marriage, like many in his life, wasn't built to last. By the late 1930s, they separated, though the actual divorce date remains unclear. Some say it was 1940, others place it closer to 1946. This uncertainty isn't just a footnote, it speaks to the murky, often hidden timeline of Lancaster's personal relationships, especially the ones that had to stay secret. During World War II, Lancaster met Norma Anderson, a stenographer-turned-actress who replaced an ailing performer in a USO show. It was a chance encounter, the kind of story that seems scripted. She saw him from across a crowded base and asked a passing officer, "Who is that good-looking man? And is he married?" They were set up that night. And by 1946, they were married. Norma was no passive Hollywood wife. She was a firebrand, deeply involved in politics. Their home wasn't a mansion full of champagne, it was a base of operations for civil rights activism. She ran printing presses in their spare room, mailed out bulletins, and worked tirelessly with the League of Women Voters. The two of them even held fundraisers for Martin Luther King Jr. Their shared passion for justice was real. But the cracks in the marriage were, too. Behind the activism, Lancaster's inner life was growing more complex, more divided. By 1966, they separated. 3 years later, it was over. In the midst of that divorce, Lancaster entered one of his most volatile relationships with Jackie Bone, a hairdresser he met while filming The Professionals. What began as passion quickly spiraled into chaos. There was one infamous dinner party. Hollywood elite in attendance when Jackie smashed a wine bottle over Lancaster's head in a fit of rage. Blood, gasps, stunned silence. It wasn't a movie. Scene. It was real. That relationship, too, would not survive. But that wasn't the whole story, not even close, as he entered his later years. And as the burden of secrecy grew heavier, Lancaster began to open up quietly, selectively too. Those he trusted, and what he revealed sent shockwaves through the inner circles of old Hollywood. He had fallen in love with men. Not once, not casually, but deeply and dangerously. The first was Cary Grant, Hollywood's polished prince. The man who embodied style and sophistication. Lancaster called their chemistry electric, but said it was always tinged with fear. They met in the late 1940s, and their romance, if you could call it, that played out behind closed doors. Along the foggy coastlines of California, Grant was intensely private. He had once lived with Randolph Scott, and rumors swirled for years about their true relationship. But Grant was terrified of exposure. Their moments together were stolen, never permanent. When it ended, Lancaster didn't blame him. He understood. The system they lived in punished truth, but then came a darker CHAPTERJ, Edgar Hoover. Not an actor. Not a lover in the traditional sense, but a man whose obsession with control extended far beyond the FBI. Lancaster described their connection as charged, not romantic, but deeply unsettling. Hoover, surrounded by whispers of his own relationship with aide, Clyde Tolson, was said to be paranoid, power-hungry, and emotionally starved. Lancaster saw a man terrified of himself, man desperate for connection but incapable of facing the mirror. And then there was Rock Hudson, tall, iconic, closeted Hudson, controlled by studio. Handlers lived in constant fear of being exposed. Their relationship was quiet, soft-spoken, long desert drives, sunset hideaways, moments where time stood still. When Hudson died of AIDS in 1985, it changed everything. The world could no longer pretend. And for Lancaster, it reopened wounds. He'd never truly healed, but nothing compared to Marlon Brando. Their affair was unlike any other volcanic, as Lancaster later called it. It began at a political rally in the 1950s. Brando, unpredictable and wild, challenged Lancaster intellectually, physically, emotionally. They fought, they loved, they unraveled each other. Lancaster once said, "He was the only man who could undo me just by looking at me." Their love was raw, destructive, impossible. It couldn't last, but it never truly ended. Perhaps the most unexpected name of all. Ricky Nelson, a teen idol, a television sweetheart. Nearly 2 decades younger. Their time together was brief, but Lancaster remembered it with deep tenderness. He called Nelson the boy who kissed like someone who had never been allowed to want. Lancaster ended it gently, not out of regret, but out of understanding. Nelson needed to find his own way. By the 1990s, Lancaster had slowed down. Health issues plagued him. He married Susan Martin in 1990. It was quiet, stable, supportive, and it lasted until his death. On October 20th, 1994, Burt Lancaster died after his 3rd heart attack. No service, no memorial. Just a plaque beneath an oak tree in Westwood Memorial Park. He had lived in the spotlight, but chose to die in peace. And what he left behind wasn't just a film legacy. 'Twas a hidden story of forbidden love, courage, and quiet defiance. 4 decades he had lived between 2 worlds, the image Hollywood sold, and the truth he carried alone. But in the end, he spoke not to confess, but to be free. Hollywood in the mid-20th century was an empire of illusions. Every studio was a kingdom, and every actor was own body, image, and voice. Contracts were ruthless. Studio heads controlled careers like puppeteers and any whiff of homosexuality. That wasn't just a scandal, it was a death sentence. Burt Lancaster wasn't just navigating fame. He was surviving a machine that demanded perfection and punished deviation. And the higher he climbed, the more he had to hide. Backroom deals were struck not just to get roles, but to bury rumors. Tabloids were bribed. Agents silenced whispers. And for someone like Lancaster, whose very persona was built on masculinity, the stakes were brutal. He was seen as the ultimate man's man, the action hero, the romantic lead, the war hero. To admit what he felt, what he lived in private would unravel everything. So he crafted a dual life. One for the cameras, one for the shadows. Cary Grant wasn't just his first. He was a mirror. Grant, too, had climbed from nothing British working-class roots to the penthouses of Los Angeles. Polished by studios, wrapped in tuxedos, and served to the world as the perfect gentleman. But inside, a man in pieces. Their time together wasn't loud. It was whispered. Safe houses, beach rentals, moments that vanished when morning came. Grant lived in fear. His previous long-term cohabitation with actor Randolph Scott had already raised eyebrows. Gossip columns had speculated for years. If anything got out, it wasn't just his image on the line, it was everything. For Lancaster, it was the first time he had felt both seen and invisible. Loved, but never claimed. When their affair ended, he didn't chase. He understood. The world they lived in didn't allow for public love, only secrets. And for men like them, secrecy was survival. But not every connection was rooted in affection. Edgar Hoover was something else entirely. Hoover wasn't someone Lancaster loved at least not in the way he loved Grant or Hudson. Their meetings were sporadic, unsettling, and layered with unspoken power. Hoover was a man consumed by image, obsessed with control, and tormented by his own duality. Publicly, he was America's moral guardian. Privately, whispers of his sexuality were passed like poison in elite circles. Lancaster once described him as a man who wanted to be worshipped, but feared being touched. Their relationship, if it could be called, that was marked by psychological intensity. Lancaster had no illusions. Hoover wasn't interested in love. He was interested in control. Their conversations teetered between seduction and interrogation. Hoover wanted to be desired, but never exposed. It didn't last. Lancaster stepped away. Not out of fear, but out of pity. He saw a man who could destroy lives. Because he couldn't face his own. Then came Rock Hudson, where Hoover was paranoia. Hudson was heartbreak, tall, magnetic. Universally adored Hudson had become a studio commodity. Fans saw the square jaw, the confident stride, the glinting smile. What they didn't see was the man constantly checking his reflection for cracks. Their first meeting was quiet. A party. Mutual friends. The conversation flowed easily. And then, slowly, the weekends began road trips into the desert. Quiet hikes, stargazing. Hudson felt safe with Lancaster. Safe enough to drop the act for a moment. But safety is fleeting. The paparazzi were always one step behind. The threat of being outed hovered like a storm. Lancaster later said, "We were always one car tail away from losing everything." Their relationship was tender but doomed. Hudson couldn't take the risk. And Lancaster wouldn't ask him to. When Hudson died of AIDS-related complications in 1985, the public mourned a Hollywood legend. Lancaster mourned in silence man he had once held, now gone and still not truly known. Marlon Brando, however, was never quiet. About anything, Brando was chaos incarnate, a whirlwind of ideas, rebellion, and hunger. Where others hid, Brando defied. Their affair was less a relationship and more a storm raging with ego, passion, and friction. They fought like rivals. They loved like addicts. Neither could control it. Lancaster was drawn to Brando's recklessness. Brando was drawn to Lancaster's restraint. They clashed constantly, pushing boundaries, testing loyalty, daring each other to fall harder. There were nights of violent arguments and mornings of unspoken tenderness. They would go months without speaking, then reunite like magnets, snapping back into place. But love that volatile doesn't last. Eventually, the fire burned too hot. Brando once told a friend he wanted to save me from myself. I wanted him to destroy everything. That difference tore them apart, but neither forgot. And then, Ricky Nelson. He was the most unlikely of them all. The all-American boy, the son of a TV family, is a teenage heartthrob with a guitar and a boyish grin. Lancaster was older, seasoned. Nelson was still becoming. Their time together was brief, quiet, but deeply intimate. Lancaster saw in him a longing he recognized, all too well the need to be loved, not just adored. He ended it not out of fear, but mercy. He said Nelson needed space to grow to become his own man, free of shadows. He never spoke of the affair publicly. Only later, in private recollection, did he mention Nelson, the boy who kissed like someone who'd never been allowed to want. These weren't just flings. They were chapters of a life lived in whispers. Every name told a different story. Every relationship revealed another fracture in the image Lancaster projected to the world. The world saw a hero, a warrior, a man of steel. What it didn't see was the quiet devastation beneath the surface, the aching loneliness of a man who could never live out loud. In his later years, Lancaster continued to work, though less frequently. Films like Atlantic City and Local Hero showed a man aging gracefully, no longer the swashbuckler, but the philosopher. He gave interviews, spoke on political panels, continued supporting civil rights movements. But privately, he had grown tired. He married Susan Martin in 1990. It was less about passion, more about peace, a quiet partnership in a world that had given him everything and taken just as much. He suffered 2 heart attacks in quick succession. The third came on October 20th, 1994. Ending his story at age 80, he left no instructions for a grand farewell. No Hollywood send-off, just a request: cremate him. Scatter his ashes under a tree. No service, no spectacle. His plaque reads simply: Burt Lancaster, 1913 to 1994. A man who, for most of his life, belonged to everyone, and yet remained known by almost no one. Burt Lancaster wasn't the only one living a double life. In fact, the deeper you look into old Hollywood, the more it starts to resemble a hall of mirrors where no one is quite what they seem, and everything is performance. It wasn't just Lancaster. It was Montgomery Clift, James Dean, Anthony Perkins, Tab Hunter. A generation of actors who carried fame in one hand and fear in the other. They weren't just hiding their truth from the public. They were hiding it from casting directors, executives, and sometimes even from themselves. Studios like MGM, Warner Bros., and Paramount had entire departments dedicated to managing these problems. Scandals were erased. Lovers were paid off. Fake romances were arranged. If an actor was caught at a gay bar, a publicist would feed the press a news story, a secret heterosexual romance, or a dramatic rehab stint to distract from the truth. It was smoke and mirrors. A lie so well funded, it became a second reality. Lancaster was trapped in that world. And unlike some of his peers, he wasn't willing to sacrifice everything, so he played the long game. He wore the mask. He married. He worked. He played the part, till the lights went out. But behind that facade was a man tormented by what could never be said. People close to him in his later years describe a haunting kind of introspection. He would stare out windows for long stretches of time. He would go quiet in the middle of conversations. Not sad, exactly. Not bitter, but searching. He once told a confidant, "There are parts of my life that never made it onto film." Oh? Not because they weren't beautiful, but because they weren't allowed. He carried that weight with a strange kind of dignity. He didn't curse the world. He didn't name names for shock value. What he shared only when he felt it was safe to do so, when the world had changed just enough to listen. But he always stopped short of saying it publicly, not out of shame, but out of loyalty. To the men he loved, to the privacy they all died protecting. What's most haunting isn't that he lived a double life. It's that, in the end, he didn't even feel the need to reclaim it publicly. There were no memoirs, no tell-alls, just quiet confessions to a few trusted friends. Stories shared over late-night drinks. Names spoken softly, like prayers. And maybe that's what makes it all the more powerful. He had nothing to prove, no one to convince. He just wanted, before the end, to stop pretending, to unburden his heart, if only in whispers. The tragedy of Burt Lancaster's story isn't that he hid who he was. It's that he had to. This was a man who risked everything to challenge the Hollywood system from within, who launched his own production company to fight for serious, socially conscious films. A man who marched for civil rights, fought for union workers, and publicly supported causes decades ahead of his time. And yet, when it came to his own truth, he was forced into silence. The very system he challenged still held him captive. But his legacy? That's more complicated. And maybe more important than ever. Because Lancaster's story isn't just about him. It's about every person who has ever had to pretend. To fit in, to stay safe, to survive. It's about how power can trap people. About how even the strongest, bravest men can be made to hide in plain sight. And about what happens when, finally, the mask is removed. He died in 1994. But in a way, he was born again through the stories he left behind. Quiet stories. Sacred stories. Stories about Cary Grant, who smiled for the camera but ached in private. About Rock Hudson, who couldn't cry until the end. About Brando, who broke every rule but still feared the truth. And about himself, a man who fought every battle, except the one he wasn't allowed to admit he was fighting. Today, Lancaster's name still echoes through film history. The performances remain. The awards, the classics, the unforgettable scenes. But somewhere beneath all of it, if you listen closely, is a heartbeat. A hidden rhythm of a man who loved in silence. Of a truth that outlived the lie. Of a secret that was never shame but survival. And maybe, just maybe, a kind of love story. One the world still isn't quite ready to tell out loud. But here, in the flicker of memory and film, grain between the frames, you can still see him. Not just the actor, not just the hero, but the man, Burt Lancaster.